Carthage must be destroyed. We are going to continue the Hail Caesar walkthrough by looking at hand-to-hand break test results today, as well as giving ground the uphill advantage and what supports are supposed to do and how they may act when break tests go down. So we talked about ranged break tests in the last video and disorder and retreating. Today we're going to look onwards into the break test section of the book. Here we have some light Italian infantry engaging with triarii, and we have some, I can't believe I couldn't tell my own units here. We got some Hastati supporting some Principe that are fighting this elephant here. So maybe it's Carthage versus, oh, you can see my dog in the background there. He's joining me today, don't mind him. But yeah, we are going to be looking today at the break tests using these units here. So just as if it was shooting, there will be break tests with hand-to-hand combat. Unlike shooting, you don't have to worry about any sixes being rolled. There's none of that in hand-to-hand combat. Hand-to-hand combat break tests happen when you've lost the combat, if you have drawn a combat and you are shaken, or if both enemies are shaken and draw the combat, they have to test. And finally, you have to test in hand-to-hand combat if a unit is supporting a unit that breaks or shatters. Sorry, I'm babysitting my dog today, so there might be some noises in the background as he walks around and scratches himself and stuff like that. But anyway, hand-to-hand combat, when you finish the hand-to-hand combat, you have to see who is the winner, who is the loser. What you do is you add up all the casualties both sides inflict on each other, and you see which side took more casualties. That's the loser. You then do your break test result, and that's on 2 d6, just like a shooting break test result, and you subtract the difference that you lost by. Okay? So let's say that these two units have fought here, and the guys back here took a casualty in the previous round, or this round of combat, and then these guys took 3. Okay? That means that after the fighting, you see that these guys took more casualties, they therefore lost. You subtract how many casualties that they lost by how many that they won by, okay? So it'd be 3 minus 1, so that'd be 2, right? Just like the range attack break test, you look at a table, which I won't show you guys here, but you look at the table, and then you roll 2 dice, okay? What do we roll here? We rolled a 10 total. It'd be a 10 minus the 2 here, it'd become 8, right? These guys lost, they subtract the difference in casualties that they lost by, and then they subtract from 2 dice rolled. So in this case, 8 for infantry, because these are infantry. On my chart it says hold your ground without penalty. They're not going anywhere, and they'll continue fighting in the next round. These guys would be winning the combat and would have bonuses to hit, whereas these guys would just be fighting on a normal 4 and up. They're not shaken or disordered or anything, so they have no penalties. So that's very basically how a break test is going to look like in Hail Caesar with just 2 units hitting on each other like that. Now it gets a little more complex when you have support units, because you add the support unit attacks in, and you might have more advantage if you have some support, right? Now let's go back to this example here. Let's say that these are both small units, so their stamina value is 4. Let's say that both units are at 4. They're both shaken right now. When you reach your stamina value, you become shaken. They're both at 4. They fight around. Neither side inflicts any casualties. That means it's a draw. Because they're shaken, both sides have to do a break test. So let's see what happens. You know, the light infantry only rolled a 3, which is no good. So that means on the chart, if I looked it up, it says break if shaken. So these guys are gone. They'd be removed from the game. As for the triarii, we'd roll and we see that let's just say that's a 9. 9 just is hold your ground without penalty. So in a draw, you could see that one side could, in a draw, if they're shaken, be completely destroyed, where the other side might run off, or they might, you know, just sit there, or maybe they're both destroyed, you know. So yeah, that's when you take break tests when there's a draw and someone's shaken, or you take a break test if you've lost the combat, right? If they had normally drawn, let's say, and they both had 3 wounds, if it's a draw, it's a draw. They're not shaken, there would be no tests. But if these triarii were shaken in a draw, and these guys weren't, only the triarii would be taking the test. Now let's look at this example here. We have the elephant fighting these Romans here. We got the Principes versus the elephant with some Hastati on the side. Now, in this scenario, let's say that the elephant here has only taken 2 wounds, but he somehow scored, maybe it's a fight over time. Maybe these Romans have had 4 wounds taken on them, and let's just say they fight another round of combat. There's a lot of assumption here, but let's assume that they fight, it's a draw. The Romans are shaken. Now the Romans have to take a break test. Now they roll here, and somehow they roll a 3 again, okay? The Romans rolled a 3. They are shaken, and according to this chart, they break if they're shaken. Okay, so they break and they're gone. You'd remove this unit, and then this unit here that was supporting this Roman unit would also have to take a break test based on the combat's results that they just went through. In this case, because it was a draw, that supporting unit there doesn't have any penalties. So they'd roll and they'd get an 8. An 8 says hold your ground. So this unit would be destroyed. The supporting unit wouldn't be doing anything based off of the results there that I just explained. And then they would no longer be an engaged unit. And depending on whose turn it is next, they could either, maybe they can charge a flank or the elephant can get in there. And yeah, that's basically the most common situations where break tests are going to happen, where it's either from fighting and you've lost, or you've drawn and one side or both sides are shaken, or if unit breaks or shatters, then it has to take a break test as a support. And when you do the support unit, you also have to subtract the results of the combat that caused the unit to be broken or shaken, right? So if these Romans lost by 2 and they broke, these guys would have a -2 to their deduction, or to their roll. So like I said, I won't get into the chart. You'll have to check that out yourself. But there's different things that happen when you do have to do hand-to-hand combat results. The best thing that happens if you've lost is hold your ground without penalty. That's very straightforward, where you just stand there and keep fighting. The next thing after that would be give ground in good order together with supports. You'll notice that it's often together with supports. Once support units are engaged and part of the engagement helping their fighting unit, they typically will not leave that unit until the combat is over, okay? So all these results will have supports following them. So you could give ground in good order, which means you just give ground 6 inches back, and it's always 6 inches. We'll talk about that soon. The other result you could have is give ground disordered. So they'd all move back with their support, and then they would all become disordered, which would give them a -1 to hit in their combat if they still continued on in combat. The one after that would be give ground together with supports, all disordered, okay? So there's a little difference here. It says give ground disordered together with supports. That just means the fighting unit. But there's a worse result where you give ground together with supports and everyone's disordered. So you might find that all your units suddenly become disordered, which become really bad for supports because the supports will be -1 to hit as well. After that, it becomes really bad if your unit has become shaken or is shaken. It's broken. It says break if shaken as a result. If you are not shaken, according to the chart, it says you just go to the last, it says give ground together with all supports disordered. So if you roll that result and you're not shaken yet, you give ground and everyone, even your supports, are disordered. And the worst thing you can possibly do is break, and that has, if you roll a 2, basically, 2 or less result means you're broken. So don't roll low, don't roll snake eyes, don't lose by 1 and roll 3. You will break, regardless of how healthy your unit is. All right, let's pick on this elephant for a moment. Now, we have this elephant here that's got the Principe is fighting them, and the Roman unit has 2 support units helping them out. Now, in this case, it's most likely the elephant will either maybe take a bunch of hits. It's actually quite a tough miniature, but let's say that it's lost the combat and it has to give ground, okay? There are some rules about elephants giving ground, but we won't get into that. Let's say that the elephants have to give ground. When you give ground, you move in the opposite direction of where the fighting unit was coming from. So in this case, you'd move 6 inches back, and that would be giving ground. The Romans can then decide as they've won if they want to continue on fighting. If they do, they'd march up and follow, and they would, all the support units would follow them as well. They would all march up to follow, and the fight would continue on with the Romans having a +1 hit because they won the previous round of combat. Now, if this elephant here was cavalry and you gave ground, it still moves 6 inches. Give ground is always 6 inches, regardless of what kind of infantry cavalry unit it is, all right? It doesn't matter what unit it is, it's going to be giving ground always at 6 inches, no matter what status it has, no matter what happens. This is not like retreating. Retreating, you move your entire movement value, right? If these were a cavalry unit, let's say they were medium cavalry, they could retreat if shot at 9 inches. But hand-to-hand combat giving ground is always 6 inches. That's the difference between retreating and giving ground. If you are, say, let's change this up a bit. Let's say that this elephant here has been flanked and you give ground. You give ground in the position that you were flanked by. So it kind of looks weird, actually. You'd think that maybe they'd back up and move like that. But actually in Hail Caesar, you continue being flanked. So they give ground flanked, right? Okay, that's what would happen. And the other thing that could happen is, let's say that you're sandwiched in here and you've lost the combat here. You can't go opposite direction either way here. You're not allowed to go this way around the unit. No, you're destroyed. If your unit is sandwiched in its flank or rear, in its flanks, rear or front, like this, or maybe, maybe it's like this and another unit's here, it's just destroyed if it has to give ground. Now, let's do another scenario. Let's say that the elephant here is fighting and it's lost and it has to give ground directly back. There's enemies behind him. He has nowhere to complete his full 6 inches. It's automatically destroyed. The same goes with terrain. If this, okay, let's do another scenario. Let's say this elephant is fighting these Romans here, and before we started playing, we determined these ruins are impassable terrain. If the Romans lose and they have to give ground, I'm sorry, but this unit will be destroyed. The fighting unit will be destroyed. There is an exception for the supporting units. Only the fighting unit that gives ground. If it can't give full ground because there's a number of reasons. If it can't give full ground because there's an enemy behind it, or there's a friendly unit that refuses to move behind it, or there's impassable terrain behind it, any unit supporting can actually opt out of the combat. They are allowed to, I would say, I don't think it really mentions it in the rule book very well, in my opinion, but what I would do is I'd give ground as much as you want to go, and then they opt out. So the supporting units that are helping a unit giving ground, and if that giving you ground unit is destroyed because of movement or what have you, or like it can't move rather, then the supporting unit will detach itself from it. It'll opt out of the fight and it will be on its own. If this happens though, the rulebook says that this unit does have to take a break test. Okay, this is kind of a weird. It's not actually weird because I was going to say it's kind of weird because you're only allowed to take one break test, but it hasn't taken a break test if it's following the parent unit. So if this happens, I assume that it would just take a normal break test without any deductions, because you're not basing it off of a combat. You're just breaking based off these guys running off or getting too confused or something like that. So you'll have to see the rulebook and interpret it your own way. I think that's how it would work. They'd move back and the support unit would just stop supporting that unit, as this one would be destroyed as they get run down by this elephant against the wall. There might also be situations where you are fighting and there's a flanker and a front assault on your lads there, on your elephant in this case. In this case, it doesn't kind of make sense to go this way or this way. You'd probably want to give ground 6 inches this way. And then if both units decided to follow, they would just follow like so. The supports would also come in as well. Now, what if there's something standing here? This is where it gets tricky, because sometimes your support might have to consider their movement, how they're going to move. It may be that you end up having to move something like this. If they want to follow through, you may actually end up switching the unit fighting. This can happen. Sometimes supports may move in a way that they end up becoming a fighting unit. This is called an incidental contact, which we'll talk about in another video. But there are situations, or we could say this, maybe this elephant gave ground, and it gave ground in a way that hey, their friends are here, and these Romans followed. Let's say there's no object here anymore. These Romans followed, and suddenly these triarii find them with their center front touching an enemy. That means now they're engaged and not supporting this unit. So that can happen where you give ground and a supporting unit suddenly finds itself contacted with an enemy's front, and they become their own engagement. Now, if you give ground, now the big thing about giving ground is you don't want anything behind you when you give ground. If there's, like I said, if there's impassable terrain or enemies behind you, you're going to be destroyed outright, automatically. No mercy at all. There is an exception though. Oh, and I should mention quickly before I get into this. This also includes engagements. So if you're fighting here, say these guys are all fighting here, and the elephant defeats these Romans. These Romans have to give ground directly back. I'm sorry, there's an engagement going on here. These Romans will be automatically destroyed. So an engagement will also block your escape route when you're giving ground. Now let's say that these Romans are back here, and these Romans are not engaged in the back here, they're just hanging out here. Let's say that the elephant defeats these Romans, and these Romans they do their break test, and they discover they have to give ground. They move back here, and they find their friends in the way. If their friends are not disordered, they're just sitting there, they're not disordered, the friends are allowed to make a single move. Now this is a move, not a 6-inch thing. Like for infantry, it's 6 inches, but if it's cavalry, they can move one single move out of the way of their friends. So in this case here, the Romans want to give ground 6. So the player who controls his unit says, okay, well, I'm going to move back 6 inches because they're friendly, they're not disordered, and they are not engaged by anything. So they're able to do that. If that happens, if the friends have to give ground for a unit to make way for them, this unit moving, regardless of what result it is from giving ground, automatically becomes disordered. So if it was give ground with good order, because their friends had to move, maybe they warned them or something, this unit automatically becomes disordered. This unit that moved for them on a roll of a 1, 2, or 3, in this case a 1, would become disordered. So moving out of your friend's way when they're giving ground may potentially cause you to become disordered. Or rather, it will definitely cause the unit giving ground to be disordered, but the friends making way on a roll of 1, 2, 3 may also become disordered. Something to remember here, if you are moving out of the way, the rule book, I do not believe, says that you have to move in a specific way. So like you could say, I'm going to move this way out of the way. That's fine. But one thing you need to remember is that proximity may come into play. If there's an enemy unit here and you say, I'm giving ground, or rather, I'm not giving ground, you say, I'm moving out of the way over here, they may become locked in proximity within 12 inches from their center front. So typically what I've done is I always give ground, or rather, I always make way for giving ground units by going backwards. That's usually the most sensical thing, but there may be a situation that you have to take proximity into play. And supporting units, as we've said here, supporting units, say these guys were fighting and they lost, supporting units will always follow the fighting unit they're helping out. It doesn't matter if they've won or what the fighting unit does, supporting units will always follow their parent unit. I call it the parent unit, it's the unit that's fighting. So if the Romans won, or lost the combat rather, and they give ground 6, their support unit would just follow with them. And then the elephant could decide if he wants to follow the combat or not. It's up to the player. If the Romans won the combat here and the elephant is driven back 6 inches for giving ground, the Romans here could say, we're going to follow. If the fighting unit decides to follow, the support units must also follow. So supporting units will always do what the fighting unit has done. It doesn't matter if they give ground, if they move forward to continue fighting, if there's a victorious sweeping advance, we'll talk about that later. But the supporting unit is basically a part of that engagement right up to the end until that fighting unit decides to stop fighting, stop pursuing, or is destroyed. And like I said, if it is destroyed, break tests happen based on the combat results or whatever situation went down. Another quick thing to throw in here, if an artillery piece like a scorpion or a catapult or something like that is caught into close combat and it loses and has to give ground, it is automatically destroyed. It doesn't matter what size it is, it doesn't matter what kind of thing it is. Artillery and baggage, if it is caught in close to hand-to-hand combat, if it's caught in hand-to-hand combat and it has to give ground, it's automatically destroyed. This just represents, you know, they've lost their machine, they've lost their goods, there's no point for them to continue fighting. So if you got your scorpions on the front line, be wary, because if an engagement happens, say the Gauls hit the scorpion head on and they defeat it, then they have to give ground, the Romans have lost a scorpion automatically. I'm going to get into something a little, I don't find it happens in the games, but it can happen, where you have a situation where, say the Carthaginians are fighting to their last stand here, maybe they're going to be driven into the river. But let's say that you have a situation like this, where you've got a Roman unit in the middle of 2 other Roman units, and he's supporting both units. Now remember here that he can support both sides. He could, their support value is only 2 for this little unit, so he could put 1 attack into his buddies there and 1 attack into his friends there. What happens if, let's say, this elephant lost the combat, gives ground, but these Triarii lost the combat and gave ground? What happens there? What happened? Well, the supporting unit is supposed to follow its fighting unit. In this case, it's supporting 2 units. In this situation, you follow the results of the first break test. So this comes here. If it's your own turn, you get a bit of a choice which way it might go, but depending on the combat, you follow the results of the first combat, and that's the only result you follow. So if this was the first fighting happening here, the Romans won, they gave support here, then these guys would follow the Romans that won. The combat, these guys would lose a support, but that's how it goes. You'd have to basically follow the first result of the fighting. That's what support happens to if they're fighting more than one. Or rather, if they're helping 2 fighting units fight more than 1 enemy unit. All right, let's talk about the uphill advantage, the last part of today's video. Here you see I put a book under my gaming mat. I don't have any hills. And I actually prefer this look because then it blends right into the table. I'm not sure how I can represent it well when I start gaming more, but sometimes what many people do is they just put a hill on the table, and the hill is kind of like a separate color. I think that is fine, but if the hill can blend in right with the tabletop, something like what I've got going here, I think it looks even better. So I might just simply create something out of foam or something like that. In any case, we're going to use this to represent the uphill advantage. Clearly here these triarii are on the top of a hill, and they have the uphill advantage if they've stopped there. So let's say it's their turn and they motor on over here, they stop right before the elephant, proximity and all that's into play, they have the uphill advantage. They stop there and they wait for the Carthaginian turn. Now the Carthaginians will say, well, let's charge up the hill. Now, something happens here that's very interesting to me. The chargers are charging, so they get +1 to hit. But if you're up a hill, you get +1 to hit as well, your defensive position. So both of these units are hitting on a 3 and up. So, you know, it's kind of it's an advantage to the defenders because they don't have to move. And then these guys still get a bonus for charging. So they're both at +1. Now, if you maintain the uphill advantage here, you continue having a +1 hit to your bonus, to your values, to hitting, if you do not move from this position, okay? So let us say that the Romans here win the combat and they cause the elephant to give ground. If the Romans decide not to pursue, they stay on the hill, they will maintain their +1 uphill advantage to hit in combat. And that means that this elephant could, you know, maybe he charges again next turn and tries to do more damage. They would have +1 to hit. But let's say that they decide we're going to abandon our uphill advantage and they go down the hill and they continue fighting. But let's say that for whatever reason they're still on the hill. If they're part of the combat and they're still on a hill, you don't get a +1 uphill advantage. You have to not have moved. You have to not have charged, countercharged, or followed up a fight. Basically, you have to be stationary in a defensive position to have the uphill advantage and not have moved. If, let's say, that these guys were fighting down here and the Romans lost and they're driven up the hill and these guys pursue them, because they lost and were forced back on the hill, they actually don't have the uphill advantage because they moved in the previous round. They have to have not moved in the previous round to have an uphill advantage. Advantage for the attackers in the break tests here. If they're fighting here and it's discovered after they're fighting that, okay, the elephant has lost, he does a break test and he finds that his result on the break test is hold your ground. In this case here, he doesn't hold his ground. He's going to give ground together with all his supports in good order. If you're fighting a unit that has the uphill advantage and you roll the give ground, if you are fighting a unit with the uphill advantage and you roll hold your ground, you will automatically give your ground. So there's something to remember. Even though he charges up the hill, he gets +1 to hit and he's got +1 for defending. If you've lost this combat here, if you lose this combat, you are going to always give ground. Even if you roll hold your ground, you will be forced to give ground. And in that case, say they hold their ground, or maybe they have to give ground, whatever the result is, it's going to be giving ground if they've lost and they have to move, is they'll move back. So yeah, basically if they lose, they're giving ground, regardless of what the result is if the elephant lost. If the Romans pursue, they will lose their uphill advantage, but they will still have +1 to hit for winning. But maybe you're defending the hill, maybe you don't want to move. They have not moved, so if the elephant decides next time to charge back in, they will still have +1 up here. So yeah, if you're charging up a hill, you better have something heavy hitting to plow through them, because Heavy infantry on a hill can be very defensive, especially if they're like hoplites with long spears or pikemen or something like that. So, especially if they're hoplites or pikemen, I would just shoot at them if you can. Like, you know, if they're like that and they have the uphill advantage. What I've had happen to me is, especially against Carthaginians, my friend will have the Numidian cavalry come up, won't charge the hill, and just do short range attacks at my units without ranged values. So if this is a triarii here getting shot at, they can't do anything unless they charge down the hill, meaning they may lose their position and the uphill advantage. So yeah, facing this kind of tactic, uphill advantage, sometimes it's good to have ranged values to kind of pepper the enemies on the hill before getting in there if your troops aren't strong enough to break through. All right, and that's all I want to do today. I just wanted to do the hand-to-hand combat, uphill advantage, and the supporting units. Next time, we're going to finish I'm just looking through the book here, we're going to finish the break test part of the book. We're going to look at moves by victorious units, the sweeping advances, some other little things like units in buildings or units that are in squares. And then we're going to get into the commander section of the Hail Caesar rulebook. And after that, it's the Victorian defeat. We're almost done this walkthrough, I think. So a couple more videos we may be done, depending on how much I put on. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and thank you for supporting this channel. If you do like this content and want to see more stuff involving miniatures, please like and subscribe to my channel, and we'll continue on doing stuff like this. We will see you all in the next one. Have a good one.